If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Today is the start of a fertility series on the podcast. So over the next few weeks, I'll be talking to various experts on different topics around fertility. And we are kicking off this fertility series with a chat about egg freezing with Dr Daniel Lantsberg. So Daniel is a consultant gynaecologist specialising in fertility, reproductive endocrinology and fertility preservation. His special interests are elective egg freezing, age-related infertility, unexplained infertility, male infertility, fertility preservation, PCOS, endometriosis and fibroids. Daniel has worked in Australia and Israel, and he now works in Australia privately in rooms in East Melbourne, which is Victoria, and also at the reproductive services unit at the Royal Women's Hospital. So when having this conversation with Daniel, and I'm sure you'll agree with me once you've listened, but you can really tell that quality of care is of the utmost importance for him and his team, and treating each and every person he sees as an individual and working with their goals is super important. So it is a really great discussion, and Daniel answers these common questions about egg freezing. We talk about what is the best age to freeze eggs? What is the process of freezing eggs? How long does it take? What are the side effects of egg freezing? We talk about the egg freezing success rates, how much does it cost, and whether or not it's covered by Medicare. So I do trust you will find this podcast valuable if you're thinking about freezing your eggs, and also don't hesitate to send it to a friend who you know might be embarking on this journey too. All right, let's dive into this episode with Dr. Daniel Lantsberg. Dr. Lantsberg, thank you so much for joining me on the Fitness Mama podcast. It's great to have you here so we can chat all things egg freezing.
Thanks for having me, Kath.
Amazing. So to start off with, could you please give our listeners just a really quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am East Melbourne-based fertility specialist working with Melbourne IVF and the Royal Women's Hospital, focusing on fertility treatments and fertility preservation. I've been doing this for quite some time. I was originally trained in Israel and then worked there as a specialist for several years before embarking on this journey which was supposed to have been temporary for just 2 years in Australia, and now we've decided to stay here and base my practice here in Melbourne.
Yeah, fantastic. So how long have you been here now?
Close to 4 years now.
Yeah, wow. Amazing. So I've got a few questions that I think are really common when it comes to this side of fertility and specifically egg freezing. But what's the main bulk of the work that you do at the moment, day to day?
So my day to day is mostly managing fertility couples who are struggling with infertility, managing their workup, investigation, trying to identify barriers for conception, and helping them fall pregnant. That is my day-to-day life and work. And gradually in the last few years, we are starting to see more and more awareness about elective egg freezing. And this is not only in my practice, but you can see that throughout Victoria, there's been almost a double in the last 4 years in the number of patients and women coming in for a discussion and undertaking elective egg freezing. So this is actually taking more and more of my time. And I thought that is an excellent topic to discuss with you today.
Yeah, and I'm excited because initially we were just going to talk about fertility, but then in discussing topics, we decided there was way too much to cover, and egg freezing alone I think will be a really helpful topic to a lot of women listening.
I agree.
What's the number one question that you get asked when it comes to egg freezing? Like, what's one of the biggest things on women's or couples' minds?
I have several questions that I get asked a lot. I think one of the most common ones is, will this impact my future fertility? A lot of women are concerned that by collecting their eggs, they will be draining their ovaries of eggs that would otherwise be able to use in the future. And there's a lot of misinformation out there with that regard. And I think it's important to understand that while undertaking elective egg freezing, you're not impacting your future fertility. And there's a very simple explanation to this. So women, they're born with about 500,000 eggs. This is what they have throughout their lifetime. They don't produce new eggs. This is what they have. And as they age, the egg number will decline and also the egg quality will decline. And a woman ovulates about 300-400 times in her lifetime. So one would wonder what happens to all of those eggs, right? There's so many eggs that just go somewhere. So what we know is that every month there's a cohort of eggs that start their growth, but only one makes it to ovulation. And the rest of the eggs just undergo cell death. So they just reabsorbed into your body and disappear. So in the process of egg freezing, we basically rescue those eggs. So we help them thrive using some really cool medications that basically help us get those eggs and be able to freeze them in time. So we're not impacting any eggs that a woman would otherwise have in the future. These are eggs would just otherwise be deemed to undergo cell death.
Interesting. That's good to know. And this is, I think, one of the most another commonly asked question is, what is the best age to freeze eggs?
Oh, I get that a lot as well. So, when women come to me, I'll always say today is the youngest you'll ever be. So the younger the eggs, the better. But freezing eggs too early may also have an impact because there are other factors to take into consideration, like what is the actual probability of a woman coming back to use those eggs. So if you freeze those eggs at the age of 25, it will probably be better than eggs frozen at 35, but there's a high probability that they won't come back for that. And it's it's a lot to go through, and financially, physically, emotionally. Although the process is very safe and complications are extremely rare, but I wouldn't advise undertaking any medical procedure when there's very likelihood for that to be futile. So the perfect age is probably somewhere between 29 and 35. Not to say that earlier completely inappropriate or later even. Women need to be advised on what their true potential of using those eggs and achieving a live birth from those eggs. And this is a personalized answer. I need to assess each woman's own circumstances to be able to give an accurate answer to that question. So there's no really limit to what is the appropriate age to freeze eggs. But having said that, the older a woman is, the more eggs she will probably need to have, and the less chance she will have to achieve a live birth from those eggs. In Victoria, there's a limit in terms of legislation. 46 is the oldest you can be to use your own eggs. And when I mean use your own eggs, I mean eggs that are collected before 46. So you can use your eggs up till the age of 51. Not to suggest that women should freeze their eggs at 46 or even after 40. The probability of a live birth from eggs after 40 is significantly reduced.
Can I just clarify, just to make sure I understood that? Are you saying from 46 you cannot freeze your eggs anymore, but you can use previously frozen eggs until the age of 51?
True. So that's exactly right. So in Victoria, you can undergo any fertility treatments with fresh eggs or frozen eggs that have been collected prior to the age of 46. Using your own eggs that have been frozen or donated eggs can be used up to the age of 51. Now, when you freeze your eggs, and as I said, I would not suggest that freezing your eggs is a good idea to wait until you're 46 or even 40. This should have been done much, much earlier. And to use those eggs, the younger those eggs are, the better the odds you'll have of achieving the initial intent, which is have a baby.
So when a woman's starting to think about freezing her eggs, what are some of the considerations that might be going through her mind? Like, I know you've mentioned a few of them, like financial, whether or not they... I'll let you answer the question. You'll be much more succinct. But what are some of the considerations?
I think taking the first steps is sometimes the hardest because there are different reasons why women come to discuss this. Some, unfortunately, are faced with, life-changing event. That could be a breakup. That could be a cancer diagnosis. It could be change of circumstances within the family. Could be a pregnancy loss. And it also could be a new relationship. So egg freezing is not only to delay conception, but it's also part of family planning. So if somebody were to consider start their family at the age of 35 or 36 and would want to have, let's say, 3 children, they need to take into consideration the future pregnancies and when at what age they will be when they actually attempt for conception. So sometimes egg freezing is for couples, when they are planning their future family before trying to even conceive naturally, to plan ahead, because we know that the older a woman is, unfortunately, the older her eggs are. And the probability of a live birth and also the risk for miscarriages and pregnancy loss is related to a woman's eggs age, not to her age. So by freezing her eggs, she basically preserves the probabilities of the age of the eggs and not her true age. So when eggs are frozen at 35 and conception occurs at 40 or 41, then the probability of a live birth remains as a 35-year-old. So
I didn't realize that.
And it's, I think also one thing that women take it also into consideration when thinking about egg freezing is where to go. Because there are many clinics out there provide this service, and those clinics range in cost, they range in availability, they range in experience. And with that regard, I think it's really important to do your research, because although this is a very costly endeavor, unfortunately, Medicare does not cover any of the costs related to egg freezing. There's a lot that goes into this process. And most importantly, more than anything, I would say the most significant factor is the lab. So you need to have an experienced lab to preserve your eggs. So not all egg freezing is the same. You need to have a lab that has done this for a long time, has learned the process, and has the best scientists and the best equipment to give your eggs really the best chance to have a live birth in the future. And I'm proud to say that I'm very lucky to be affiliated with Melbourne IVF, who's a pioneer in the field. I've shared space next to some of the brilliant minds in the fertility world today. 2 more specifically that I'm extremely proud to be affiliated with is one is Deborah Gook, who was the first Australian to freeze eggs and actually achieve a live birth. And this was back in the day where this wasn't even possible in Australia. She had to fly over to Italy to do that. And she still is leading the program of cryopreservation and innovating how we freeze eggs today. And the second person is Professor David Gardner, who is a world leader in the field of reproductive medicine, and he's the scientific director of Melbourne IVF. And not surprisingly, Melbourne IVF is the biggest fertility provider in Victoria, providing egg freezing today. And it makes my job much easier because I know that we have already much experience in having children from frozen eggs, which is something that not a lot of clinics can say in their record. Not to say that they're not as good, but I feel that we have the experience and knowledge and already a track record to show that egg freezing is actually working.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months. Yes, that's 9 months. They also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. And that is a perfect segue into my next question, which is, what are the success rates of egg freezing, and does it vary? I know you touched on it before, but does it vary on how long the egg's been frozen for?
So these are very excellent questions. I'll start with the easy one, which is the length of time those eggs are frozen does not impact the probability of success, assuming you have a fantastic lab like we do. And as long as the eggs are maintained in perfect condition throughout that time, that shouldn't impact the probability of success. Now, in terms of success rates, there's some really exciting news out there that we hope to publish in the coming months. We are actually working on this. We had a really interesting meeting this week and reviewing our results, and they're mind-blowing. I cannot tell you the actual numbers for Melbourne IVF yet because they haven't been published, but they will be, I promise, in the coming months. But it will blow the mind of the scientific community worldwide. And these are amazing results. But I can tell you what has been published now in the world. And success rates relate mostly to the age of the woman when she froze her eggs. So just to give you an example, we say to get a very good chance of a live birth, for a woman under 35, she will probably require somewhere between 20 and 25 eggs to have a very good chance. There's never a 100% guarantee, and you shouldn't be under the impression that there's 100%. There's never 100%, but it's getting close to that. So it's probably around the 80, 90% chance, which are very good numbers. Now, so getting those numbers for under 35. But the thing is, we're getting more and more patients coming at a later age, and they will require a lot more eggs. Just as an example, at the age of 40, you will need probably 3 times as much. So freezing eggs at later ages will require multiple cycles to bank significant number of eggs to provide you a good chance for a future live birth. So the odds are excellent. And we are happy to say that women that come back to use their eggs and have frozen their eggs under the age of 35 have an excellent chance of a future live birth from that. Yeah. But numbers will soon be published, I promise.
Okay, we'll keep a close eye on that.
Yes.
That is great news. That is also a good lead. That leads me into a question about freezing eggs in terms of how many cycles does it take? And can you talk us through a little bit about the process, like how painful is it and what are the side effects and that sort of thing?
Of course. In Australia, the average number of IVF cycles with couples struggling with infertility would probably be about 2.6. So that means that usually it doesn't really happen always in one cycle. And this also relates to egg freezing. And I think it's really important to understand the specific circumstances of each person. So for some women who have an excellent ovarian reserve, meaning they've got a lot of eggs in their ovaries, then they can do just one cycle and bank really good number of eggs. And these could be as high as 20, 30 eggs in one cycle. But for some women, for different reasons, whether those are genetic or environmental, they have less eggs in their ovaries and they might require several cycles to bank significant number of eggs. So it's really important when I speak to my patients, I give them individualized consultations, telling them what my expectations are, because I can assess their ovarian reserve. I can tell them where they are in terms of the number of eggs that they have. And this will help me also predict what the number of eggs that we can achieve in a cycle. And then we can discuss about what is a good probability for a future baby and how many cycles they may need. I'm happy to say that most young women, if they come young enough, they would have enough eggs after one cycle. But sometimes that's not the case. And these expectations will be given to each woman in their individualized consultation with me. With regards to the process, I'm happy to say that this is a very, very safe process, but like any other medical intervention, complications can occur. These complications are very rare, about 1 in 1,500 cases where we can see excessive blood loss from the ovary or a risk for infection. And these are, as I said, extremely rare. The most significant complications from fertility treatments in general are overstimulating your ovaries, what we call OHSS, which is ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is a condition that occurs if we get too many eggs, and that's the body's way to react to getting too many eggs collected at one go. But this is more common to occur in women undergoing fertility treatments for the purpose of conception. And it is extremely rare to occur during egg freezing. And the reason for that is that we are able to give these women different types of medications that reduce that risk significantly. So I would say the risk of OHSS is less than 1% in egg freezing, and is basically virtually extremely, extremely rare. So in general, I would say complications are extremely rare. I don't think that should deter women for considering this.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. And during the actual collection, can you quickly talk us through what's the process? How long does it take? How many injections are required and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so these are really important questions. And there are different ways of stimulating the ovaries. Generally, it's a process that takes somewhere between 10 and 14 days using injections. There are ways of reducing the number of injections for women who struggle with needle phobia. There are ways to avoid injections altogether, but that is usually not something that I advocate for in the process of egg freezing rather than other fertility treatments. But it is possible, so that should not deter women. During the 2 weeks of ovarian stimulation, we monitor the number and the size of the follicles that are growing in the ovaries. That is done through and using an internal ultrasound. When the follicles, which are the tiny sacs where the eggs are developing, when they reach a mature size, which, as I said, take about 10 to 14 days, we undertake a procedure called egg collection. So it's a procedure we do under sedation. That means the woman will be asleep. She won't feel anything. And what we do is we take the same ultrasound probe that we use for routine ultrasounds, but the only difference, it has a needle on it. And through the vagina, I'm able to extract those follicles using ultrasound guidance. So I use very, very fine needle and aspirate the follicles. So I don't see the actual eggs. I only see the fluid that's within the follicle where the egg is nesting. And I will be able to see that as the follicle collapses over my needle and I aspirate all the fluid and it flows into the tube that is right next to me. And then like that, I will collect basically all the follicles in both ovaries. And at the same time, within the operating theatre, we have a scientific team who take all these tubes and they look for the eggs that we've just aspirated. And then they take them into the lab and process those. We have to strip them of some surrounding cells and assess their maturity and freeze them.
Yeah, right. I didn't actually realise it was such a manual process where you extract each egg manually and individually.
Yeah, it's amazing. This process, you have to realize it's only become like widely available and considered non-experimental for the last decade. So when we started this process about 40 years ago, when I said Deb Cook started this, and her colleagues, we couldn't freeze eggs very well. Like about 2% of the eggs survived the freezing and warming process. It was terrible. So it was only offered initially to women about to undergo cancer, chemotherapy, and radiation treatments. And Deb set up the first egg bank in Australia, here in Victoria, in Melbourne. And as our techniques and technology progress, we are actually able to say that we've advanced so significantly that eggs survive the freezing and warming process amazingly. And we say about 90% of eggs here survive the process, which is amazing. So this is we live in a fantastic era where this is optional for women to take control over the reproductive future. And more than a decade ago, this was not available.
It's exciting, and just with the options available for women, it's fantastic. Last question.
Okay.
Before we wrap up.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to ask it, but I am. Can you tell us roughly I know they're going to vary greatly, but roughly the cost of freezing the eggs and how much it costs for storage as well?
Sure. So look, costs vary from clinic to clinic. I personally myself do not give my patients consultation about costs because this is not managed by me. And there's a lot of cost going into this. So and as I said, there's a wide range of different clinics, and cheaper in that sense is not always better, and expensive doesn't always mean that it's better.
Yeah.
Do your research with regards to the clinic where you do your treatment. Check the experience of the lab, the track record. And of course, cost comes into play because this is not cheap, and it's very, very unfortunate that Medicare has yet to realize how important this is. And actually will probably save money in the long run. I can tell you that I have a lot of patients coming to me after the age of 40 for fertility treatments. And sure, we can offer, and many of them will fall pregnant, but unfortunately some will not because they come to seek treatment too late. And if all of them had the ability to freeze their eggs when they were younger, the odds would have been so much better. But to answer your questions, we say normally the average cycle cost is somewhere around between $5,500 for one cycle. But the additional costs, as you mentioned, the costs for medications, the costs for storage, and these can vary between different regimens that we use to stimulate the ovaries. And there's a few $100 cost for every 6 month storage fees. So there are additional costs to this for sure. And I know that it is very sad that the finance sometimes is a barrier for women to consider this option. And I wish it would have been offered for cheaper, but because there's no cover, and for us, there's no way of cutting costs. Costs are when you look at the importance of using the best materials, the best technology in the lab, and the best scientists, that you have to pay them to do this. And you've got all these costs that mount up. When you cut costs, you cut on quality. And that's something that we try to avoid and give our patients the best quality of care and actually the best probability of really achieving what they came here for, which is to have a real chance of having a baby from those eggs.
Yeah. And that's why it's so great that we are chatting and we're increasing the awareness of this, because the more awareness there is in society, then the more likely, hopefully, we'll get Medicare funding. Just like I keep talking about being for every woman who's given birth, for them to be able to be offered one pelvic floor physio assessment at around 6 weeks, Medicare funded, because I think that will help to prevent so many issues down the track. So I think that would actually be cost saving for the government. But anyway, it's a whole new topic. But I think the more we can chat, the better.
I completely agree, Kath. And I think we are part of the same team, you and I. We talk about preventive medicine. So when it comes to physiotherapy, there's a lot of damage that can be prevented by taking preemptive measures. And when we talk about elective egg freezing, this is exactly the same. We talk about the possibility of preventing the need to undergo the emotional frustration, the physical frustration of infertility at advanced age, which has become a very common indication for couples or women undergoing IVF. So sometimes women at their 30s are not thinking of this and they say, it's not my problem now. I'm young and, I've got time. But all of a sudden they find themselves in situations where they have limit options. And it's our role to educate everyone to at least have a discussion about this and keep it out in the open. There's no shame to discuss about delayed family planning and elective egg freezing. This is part of our modern life. And if we keep it out in the open and have open discussions like this about these options, I think it will empower everyone and empower women to make choices for themselves when they have options.
And on that note, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this conversation. So thank you so much, Dr. Lantsberg. It's been a pleasure to chat all things egg freezing. I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat today.
It was a pleasure to join you, Kath.
So that's it, ladies. Don't forget to send myself a message on Instagram, but also Dr. Daniel Lantsberg, and I'll put both those Instagram links in the show notes, so check it out. We would both love to hear from you. Did you listen to this podcast episode? Did you find it helpful? And also, if you are enjoying these podcast episodes, it really does help if you could please leave a rating and review. This helps the podcast reach more people who might also benefit from listening to the podcast. So it's really helpful. So if you could quickly go give it a rating and a review if you enjoyed the podcast, that would be amazing. And if you are a health professional or if you want to shout out, then don't hesitate to leave your Instagram name and I can give you a shout out. So that's it, ladies. We will see you next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at FitnessMama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.